Hi, and welcome back to Recovery His Way on the campus of the His Way Recovery Center in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm Stuart Whiting, sitting down once again with our director, Tom Reynolds. Good afternoon, Tom.
Good afternoon, Stuart.
Good to see you. Good to sit down again today. We're continuing in a series on ethics. And obviously something that is important to every person, certainly every Christian, and we're trying to be thoughtful about that as we attempt to deliver this ministry of a Christ-centered recovery. Right. And I know it's really great teaching, and let me see if I can kind of recap where we are in what you've laid out. That we, all people kind of begin with this ethic, the way we interact with others, I guess at the core of what an ethic is, in a very reactive way. And I'm going to do unto you as you have done to me. Right. And so much of our life is lived out trying to justify how we, our bad behaviors towards others because, well, look what they did to me. And I mean, we have shows and TV, television shows and social media is all about that. Right. But the golden rule comes into that general rule, and so many people are familiar with that and saying, no, we should do unto others as we would like them to do to us. Exactly. And that's a great thing to strive for. But what you've really trying to bring to the table here is there's a deeper ethic that Christ moves us into, the gospel ethic, which says we want to do unto others as God, as Christ has done for us.
Right.
And so is that kind of where we're going here?
Right. And then really this ethic then becomes about, we're looking, okay, what has Christ done for us?
Right.
And then how do I interact with others on that basis? I think that's really where the ethic flows from. It's the asking the question, how has God treated me, and how does that then define how I treat those around me?
Yeah, I love how you've, so the couple of weeks that we've spent were the first, I guess, looking at the life of Christ, the first event that starts to expose an ethic is the incarnation. Right. And I really appreciate about that is that you're not just looking at teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, and that's important too, but he is the ethic. Christ is the ethic. Right. His story is the ethic. Right. And so looking at that, and so tell us a little bit about the incarnation ethic part of the gospel ethic.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, in terms of, I call it the Christmas ethic, but, that's right. In terms of
the C's, I should have remembered.
But I think the idea is that, you're asking the question, okay, how does God interact with us? And so the initial interaction, obviously, he sends his son. So the incarnation becomes the first emphasis of that. And of course, the scripture we have is, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. Right. So it's an ethic driven by love, motivated by love, looking out for the best interest of others. And then it's about giving. Love gives, right? So that becomes fundamental.
Looks for ways to give.
Right. It's not just, again, reactive. When do I have to give? When it really looks.
Yeah, I always love that phrase. Oh, he'd give the shirt off his back to anyone. It's like, but is he looking for ways to go do that, or is it just waiting for someone to knock on my door?
Right. Yeah. And then kind of a part of that too, in Philippians, it talks about how when Jesus does come, he comes in humility. And so really seeing humility as a part of that ethic too, where I come and I lower myself, I submit myself, I give myself. I don't just give from this high and lofty place down to those who are needy, but I enter their need and I become a part of that and humble myself in that sense, in terms of seeing how our ethics operate. So in recovery, for instance, therefore, I engage people motivated by love. And I think that's interesting because a lot of guys react and say, what's up with you guys? You seem to want to help us and do all this, but what's in it for you?
Yeah.
That's always kind of the first reaction we get from people. They're suspicious because people don't do things like this unless there's going to be something they're going to get out of it. So helping them discover love and giving, and then see that motivation. One of the beauties that I know we've talked about before is when you see a guy really grasp that, he begins to give his shirt off his back, for other people. And that's something he typically hadn't been doing. He had been trying to extract as many shirts as he could out of the world. And all of a sudden that gets reversed very quickly in people's lives. And you begin to see this gospel message really, and this gospel ethic really beginning to transform the thinking and the attitudes as they encounter.
Yeah. And so we move from the Christmas ethic to the cross ethic.
Correct.
And so walk us through that briefly.
Well, and the cross ethic is about sacrifice. It's about giving again. It kind of flows out of giving. It's about sacrifice. It's also one of the things I talk about is accountability. Right. That the cross says that there's an accounting for things, that when I sin, there's a price to be paid. Mm-hmm. And of course, through the Old Testament, it's a price of sacrifices and that kind of thing. But obviously, we learn there that, to obey is better than sacrifice. Ultimately, the sacrifice, while it serves a purpose, isn't the ultimate purpose. And that what Jesus does on the cross kind of brings that ultimate fulfillment. And so, but it's accountability. Jesus came and had to die for something.
Right.
And the fact that there's an ownership I have that, I think so many times we don't think of the price of sin. And that price is constantly paid. I mean, it's not even just that Jesus paid it obviously on the cross, but we still suffer those sins of others.
Yeah, I like how you put that the previous episode, talking about that in any relationship, you have to bear each other's consequences.
Right.
of the accountability of that, because otherwise you just you'd have no relationships.
Right.
And know going in that that's a part of it. And this idea, then you're back to, well, look how they harmed me. And we're back to regressing into the general rule.
I mean, you think about, love bears all things, right? Love covers a multitude of sins.
Yeah.
That kind of principle, I think, really falls here. So accountability, sacrifice, obviously, in the cross is critical to that principle as well. The other one's forgiveness.
Forgiveness, of course. Yeah, it's almost something we take for granted,
right,
but also difficult.
Right, but I mean, I think, again, as we were talking about, forgiveness is costly. It's not just a matter of kind of letting somebody off the hook. It's realizing that their sin, I'm willing to bear the consequences of that sin. And I still value our relationship more than I do the harm. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to, absorb that harm for the sake of our relationship at some point. So, and that's all a part of the process of what happens with the cross.
Yeah. And it's interesting how we can, we can have, I think in our culture and social media and stuff, and how, we want to be free of judgment and all these things. And yet at the end of the day, that always comes back in. We always are, separating and dividing, and this ethic kind of cuts through that and says what is most important is the relationship and building each other up and doing what is best for someone else, because you are trying to treat them as you have been treated by God.
One of the things that our founder, Clyde, would always emphasize to me was that the relationship and being united and connected to people out of love was far more important than anything else.
Yeah.
So, if he got burned on something, if somebody mistreated, whatever, and there could be flat wrong, it's like ultimately he would say, well, love's going to win. Love's the most important thing. And being connected with them and related to them is way more important than any of those things.
Yeah. And it's not something valued in our culture. And it's no wonder that Christ says that the love you have for one another is going to be the most important hallmark, calling card of people seeing that something is unique and different. And we heard it again at graduation a couple of days ago, multiple graduates mentioning this love and sacrifice for each other and the feeling of this, relationship that speaks so much more, than what we could ever say in a class or just what we want to have for them. They actually experience it.
Right.
So we're moving into a third aspect of the gospel ethic today.
Right.
What is that?
Well, celebration. Keep my
Gotta
seeds
have the
going.
seeds, Christmas, celebration.
But it's about resurrection. I mean, obviously, the ultimate message of Christianity is that there's a resurrection, that Jesus conquered death. That's what sets Christianity apart from any other religion, is the fact that our founder is still alive, right? That he went to a cross and died for our sins, and that up from the grave he arose. And so I think that's a key part of the Christian message, is that it's ultimately a message of victory. It's a message of hope. It's a message of conquest and deliverance and those kind of things. And so I think that becomes an important part of the ethic, as well as is this idea that even within the context of addiction, that there's hope, that there's this resurrection, that there's new life, that there's a opportunity and possibility that the old can be gone and new can happen, and that all that is, and so it's a fundamental optimism. It's a belief that no matter how bad things have been or how dark they've been, there's a brightness, there's a light, there's a new beginning. And so really emphasizing that in terms of the culture. And I thought in a lot of situations with in addiction, there's kind of in recovery things, I've seen a lot of negativity, a lot of kind of downer, you've really screwed up, you're no good, you'll never make it, that kind of thing. That's not Christianity. And the message of the cross and the message of the empty tomb is the fact that no matter how bad it's gotten, that there's hope, that there's a win here.
Yeah, I wonder. I've picked up a little bit, having been around, recovery for 6 years or so now, that there's at times you can get this sense that there's almost this pride and joy in kind of wallowing in, in the past failures, and maybe that's a way of trying to cope and self-medicate almost, in a therapeutic way, but it doesn't get you anywhere to stay there. I'm thinking of one individual in particular who the first couple weeks he was here, I heard him every time I heard him talking to someone else, it was about what he was like and what he kind of just and not bragging on it, but just like being fully defined by that, and it was all very negative, and his time on the streets and his time in prison, and then a month or so later, it seemed like all of a sudden, that wasn't something he was defining himself by, and it was positive. He became a Christian while he was here, and is doing really great. And so I don't know if we talk enough, and I don't mean us his way, but us as Christians, Christianity talks enough about the resurrection,
right?
About you said it right in your opening, that it's the thing that defines Christianity is most important, as Paul would say. If Christ didn't rise from the dead, what are you doing? What are you doing? Do you think we talk about it enough in our Christian culture?
And not only do we not talk about it enough, we don't live it enough. We don't live with that sense. And let me kind of explain what I'm talking about here with this ethic. So there's 3 points that I make about this as well. One of is victory. That, the resurrection ultimately declares that sin is defeated, that death is defeated, that death no longer has a grip, and that Jesus conquers that, and that we have a victory through Christ.
Yeah.
And, as Paul says, death, where is your sting? Death, where is your victory? That has no power anymore, but that our victory is now, thanks be to God who gives victory through Jesus Christ. And so it's a victorious message. It's a message in which we are more than conquerors. I mean, think about that. We're more than conquerors. I mean, this Sunday, either the Philadelphia Eagles or the Kansas City Chiefs will be a conqueror, right? But the next day, they have to start back at square one and figure out how they're going to conquer again, right? Yeah. And it's the constant plight of a conqueror. I mean, as soon as you're the heavyweight champion of the world, there's another guy out there that wants to knock you off, right? It's the king of the mountain kind of thing. And in Christ, we're more than conquerors. We don't have to keep fighting every day to prove that we are a victor anymore. We don't have to keep fighting to show that we have won. We have won. We are victorious. And so embracing being in Christ is about embracing that I am victorious. I've won. I am winning. I've won. I will always win this battle.
Yeah, I like the way you're using the verb tenses there, because I do think when we talk about resurrection, when it does come up, it tends to be last day resurrection. Right. I'm just kind of biding my time, waiting, and then one day Christ is going to return, or I'm going to die, and we're going to finally be transported to the ethereal place where everything is different. And it's like that's just that's quite foreign to the New Testament, because the victory is now,
right?
And you're to be living into that resurrection life today. Right. Your transformation has begun.
Right.
Which is, I know, difficult, because that's a faith statement, and it's not something I can see on my skin and necessarily always it's not tactile. Right. And yet it's not something we're just waiting to happen to us either.
Think about this. I try to emphasize this with the guys. When you're winning, you behave differently than when you're losing. In sports, which team is trying to extend the game? The winning team or the losing team? The losers are always run out of bounds, calling timeout, trying to stop the clock with so many tenths of a second left to get one more chance, one more Hail Mary, whenever, right? Spiking the ball, all that kind of stuff. Because they're losing, they want to extend the game. Winners don't do that. They're ready for the time to speed up. They want the game to be over. And I guess the question I raise is, when you look at how we live, do we live like we're always calling timeout, trying to extend the game? Or are we looking forward to the end of the game because we've already won, we know we've won, and we're looking forward to the Gatorade bath and the celebration? And I'm afraid that too many times as Christians, we live like we're losing instead of living like we're winning.
Yeah.
And I think that whether it's extending life, trying to stretch it out, live it further, whatever it is, it's about living victoriously and believing that we have already won. And so we don't live in panic. We don't live in fear. We don't live with constantly trying to call timeout and run out of bounds. We're living with this sense of conquest and victory and confidence.
You remind me of a passage in Hebrews that says that, because we are flesh and blood, Christ put this on, and he became human to conquer death, the thing that had us enslaved, fear, the ultimate thing that we're afraid of. And by knowing that is already, that's no longer a problem for us, then boy, the freedom that is to bring, and not living in fear of death. And that is the motivator for almost everything. I'm afraid of dying. Therefore, I need more security. I need more comfort. I need better health. I need all these things because what's going to happen when I die? And so the message does cut through that, and is to change us. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and for instance, things like, when our guys here really grasp that they are more than conquerors of Christ, that they've already won in Jesus Christ, then when they go to court, they're not wondering whether they're going to win or lose the court case. They've already won. And whether they get the best result or the worst result, that doesn't change the fact that they've already won in Christ. And when you take that pressure off of everything, how much better do you not engage those things with confidence and assurance? Because the judge isn't going to do anything to me that God hasn't already done and can do and overcome and all those kind of things. So there's nothing out there I need to be intimidated by. I need to be fearful about. I need to be wringing my hands over. There's nothing the doctor's going to tell me that's going to take away the fact that I'm already victorious. I've already won.
Yeah, of course, we have a couple staff members at this very moment who are going through extended legal issues where they've just expressed that through their transformation and recovery and becoming Christians. They just say, I wanted to go a certain way, of course, but I have this, thing that, and I, because of the consequences of things I've done, and man, to hear their faith just come out and say, but it's going to be okay, whatever happens. And and that's got to just change your, we're not just, ideas running around on a stick. Your whole body, your physical well-being and all that just got to be tied up together in this completely different state of mind. Yeah, it's how important.
Exactly. So so this celebration ethics, has victory obviously embedded in, and it also has. And one of the things Paul says in Ephesians 1, as he prays for the Christians in Ephesus, he says ultimately that I pray also that your hearts will be enlightened, that you'll realize the riches of his inheritance in the saints, and that you'll grasp the full power that he has made available to us, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead. So that's, again, a living thing. It's an active thing. It's
today.
not just something in the future. That I can live with the power that raised Jesus from the dead already existent in me, and that I engage the world with that sense of power. And so that's, I think, another sense of that celebration, that greater is he that is in me than he is in the world. So there's nothing the world's going to bring at me that I don't already have a power greater in me that can deal with that particular circumstance.
Yeah, you said earlier that what sets Christianity apart is the fact that our leader has conquered death and raised again. But then this is that other surprising follow-up, in that same power is in us. I mean, that's just scandalous almost, and it's really so hard, as hard as it is to grasp, and that God comes in the form of man and fully human and fully divine, but now saying that we can participate in the divine nature is mind blowing. Totally.
And one of my favorite passages that I like to share with the guys that really gets me excited, I think gets them excited, is in Romans 8:11, where when Paul talks there about that the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead now resides in you.
Complete
So
nuts.
therefore, the implication is that the same thing that allowed Jesus to rise from the dead is within us that will allow us to do the very same thing.
Right.
And so that resurrection, our resurrection, isn't a moral question. And I think, so many times I talk to people like, well, are you going to rise from there? Are you going to heaven? Those kind of questions. Well, hopefully I've been good enough.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I've lived a good life. I remember a long time ago, I had a friend and I asked them that question straight up and they said, well, we hope so. We hope that, we've lived a good life, that we've paid our taxes, that we've been good citizens and that kind of thing. They said, what about you? What do you think? I said, absolutely. And they go, well, you're better than us. How do you think you paid all your taxes? I was like, I said, no, the fact that God's Spirit resides in me, it's not a moral question. It's almost a physics question.
Yeah.
It's like that if, for instance, real simply, if God were a magnet and He's placed metal in me, when that magnet goes off, I'm going to go. I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
It happens.
Right.
And so if the Spirit's like that, then the same thing is true.
Yeah.
And if that's the reason Jesus rose from the dead, that's the reason I can rise from the dead. So
I think we've taught for too long in Christian circles that kind of way of thinking where you're really just going back to some balancing of the scales, and it's the very mindset and being defined by law keeping that Jesus came to destroy and Paul, or to fulfill and destroy. And Paul says, don't go rebuilding for yourself another measuring stick. That's been taken away. Praise be to God that it's been taken away, because we're all going to fall short in that measuring stick. Can you also talk about, I know in this idea about hope, and you're thinking about some of that just comes right out of this, right? That the hope we have.
Right. I mean, Peter will say that, because of this, we have a living hope.
Living,
active, living, vibrant, again, current.
Yeah.
It's not just a by and by. The biblical idea of hope isn't, wishful thinking. It's typically, I hope my team wins on Sunday. It's a confident expectation. It's an anticipation of and a belief of something that is already since happened. It's already
fully realized it yet.
Right. And so, so I think that's another part of resurrection is that you live hopeful, you live optimistically, you live with an active sense of anticipation of something good. Doesn't mean that everything is good. It's kind of like in Romans 8, right? Not everything that's going to happen to me is good. However, everything that's going to happen to me can accomplish good. It can accomplish good things because all things work together for the good to those who love God and accomplish His purpose. So everything I embrace, ultimately, I believe, is for the good. I don't understand it at the time. I may not comprehend it, but I embrace it because of faith. I embrace it as a good. I embrace it as a positive, as something that's going to fulfill some kind of positive expectation in the future. So, I think that's really important in a culture, obviously, that is so negative and so dark and so cynical.
Yeah.
To be a person who lived victoriously and powerfully and hopefully, and you engage life with that sense of celebration every single day, you stand out as a light. You stand out as a bright, shining contrast to the darkness of the world in which we live. And so I think that's how we proclaim the gospel.
Yeah.
It's not always just about preaching the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus at people.
Right.
It's about living so contrary to the culture, to the media, to my neighbors, sometimes to my family members. I didn't grow up in a particularly optimistic family. I grew up in a family that was pretty dour about things, not particularly optimistic, kind of hand-wringing, worried, anxious.
Yeah.
But I find myself not that way. But it's 40 years of a belief system that I've tried to retrain myself to engage life optimistically and positively because of the resurrection. And I really want our guys to grasp that same idea. And obviously that's identity transforming, which is at the core of this whole transformation process, is really changing one's identity from loser to winner, from conquered to conqueror, and those kind of things. And I think that's a key part of this process. I think in a lot of cases, the message you were mentioning earlier, the message within recovery circles even is, well, you're just an addict, you'll always be an addict, and that's kind of the way it is. You got to kind of make the best of your situation.
It's at the heart of your identity.
Right. Yeah. And I understand some of the things are being said there.
Yeah.
I don't think you want to lose the sense that you have a vulnerability and that you need to stay humble to that and aware. But I think at the same time, living in that constant negativity, just kind of continues to set me up for failure after failure. And I don't think that's the gospel.
Yeah, Paul, he's like, when he's writing the Times, he's like, hey, such were some of you.
Right.
Or these, but he's calling them to move in through victory and power and hope into something that's quite different. Talking about the difference between just like talking about the resurrection and living it out, and that is an important distinction. We get to witness that in Acts, don't we, with this disciple group who were so certain they understood what Messiah was about until what really was happening with Jesus was being played out there in the scenes in Passover, and they basically leave, and I'm think of the road to Emmaus and the two who were like, man, if you only knew the terrible things that have happened. And Jesus is like, well, tell me about them, which I think is so funny. Right. But they have that haunting kind of statement. We had hoped,
right,
this is going to be the one. Life hasn't turned out like we thought. Right. But then when it's exposed, when Jesus opens up their eyes, and when the other disciples and the apostles see the truth of the resurrection, well, look at who they become. Right. Look at what they're willing to completely be and do, because, who am I going to be defeated by?
Right.
What else? What possible difficulty can I not be overcome?
What an amazing transformation! I mean, Peter, who denies he even knows Jesus in front of servant girls out of fear that they're going to spread a message to somebody, and he could end up swept up in this thing with Jesus. I mean, weeks later, is standing for the very people who executed Jesus and charging them with the responsibility of having killed the Messiah that has risen from the dead. The reason why he can do that is because the only thing that stands in between those two things is a resurrection. And that's the transformative power of Peter and all the apostles who, go from cowering in an upper room to boldly proclaiming the message at the city square and at the temple courts.
Yeah, and they suffer.
Right.
No doubt about it.
Right.
Yeah, and yet,
gladly suffer.
And gladly suffer. Yeah.
Right.
And so we still, maybe there's a question for us lingering that if we're afraid to suffer, perhaps we're still really afraid of death. And perhaps we haven't really taken to heart the truth of the resurrection celebration, truth that Jesus brought to free us from those things.
Right.
Yeah. So this has been a really great, I think, deep dive into how the life of Christ reveals how God dealt with us and the kind of ethic he's leaving behind that we can bring not only to our relationship with God, and which thanks be to Christ Jesus that we have that relationship, but as importantly, how we are with one another.
Right.
And there's no doubt in my mind, I was having this discussion with family members recently that, unfortunately, the more we can communicate and get the world's information at our fingertips, it's hard to be optimistic, right? When you look at the big scale, well, the world's kind of always been, on that level, even though we fool ourselves into thinking that there was better times before. And so our challenge, though, is going to be, how do we bring the truth of the resurrection in our lives into our communities? And when we do, it'll draw people. Right. Absolutely draw people. Right. And I think we're looking for other solutions than the one that's Christ just says, He lift me up. Right. I'll draw men to me. That's right. And we get to see it here firsthand, and it's a beautiful thing when it comes and you just these guys just learning about grace and love and hope that it wasn't really available maybe in their life before that. So it's a great thing to be part of. Yeah, I'm excited. This in a couple of days over in Atlanta, they're going to have a couple of guys. One who came into our program absolutely antagonistic toward Christ, who's going to put on Christ in baptism after 1 year of living in this community. Yeah. And as well as another guy too, and they're both going to go over to somebody's pool and have a big celebration and, grill out and just really have this party over the son that had wandered away, who has now been found. Right. And now celebrate a victory. Become conquerors. That's right. Well, appreciate the conversation today. So
Enjoy it.
send out, yeah, all the time. And thank you for joining us, listening in, and watching us. If you have any questions about His Way, you can check us out on the website at hiswayinc.org.